Hi everyone, George here, and I am at Tropica Aquarium Plants here in Denmark again. Time for an update on the Interzoo 2020 aquariums that we set up 2 weeks ago for Tropica's 50th birthday special. So we'll take a look at all of the aquariums, give you a general update, and we'll also look at some details on starter plants, why they're useful and how we trim them, and also some algae crew. So let's go and jump on right over to the test lab. So here we are with the decade tanks, each tank representing 10 years since Tropica was founded 50 years ago. So 1970, 80, all the way up to present day. Overall, plant health is really good, hardly any nuisance algae, a couple of minor issues which we'll talk about in a moment. You may notice these potted plants here, all the same species, Limnophila Flora. These are what we call helping plants. So we plant these right at the start. These grow very fast, and the faster the plant's growing, the more nutrients it's uptaking and the less chance of algae we get. So we deliberately heavily plant this Limnophila in all of the tanks apart from the easy category because there's lots of plants in there already. This really does help give us the best start possible. We do need to trim these, so we'll do that later and I'll show you exactly how we do that. But let's just go through each tank in a little bit more detail. So the tank on the left here, this is the 1970 to 1980, all great plant growth. We've got the Algae Eaters in there already, the Amano shrimp and the nearite snails. Put these in a couple of hours ago and they're already hard at work eating the minor traces of algae that are in here. We can see new growth already on the HemiAnthis quadricostatus, which looks good. So you can see new growth on the MRSA Layer, and in general, a really good looking tank. Moving over to the 1980 to 1990 tank. The GlossoStigma has gone quite leggy, and the reason for that is the lighting isn't probably quite high enough to promote a dense carpet. But we don't want to start off with too much light, otherwise this will give us algae problems. So we can start off with lower light and then we can gradually boost that lighting over the next few weeks or so if necessary. So we'll trim that Glosso back and this will help promote new growth and hopefully it will start to carpet quite soon. Moving over to the 1990 to 2000 tank, you can see already that the HemiAnthis Kiba is starting to form a solid carpet already in just 2 weeks. So this is really good news. All the other plants are growing really well. We definitely need to trim back the Limnophila in here. It's starting to smother the other plants and causing shading. We definitely need to hack that right back. All the other plants are doing really well and I can't actually see any nuisance algae at all in here, but we still have put the Algae Eaters in there as a preventative measure. Moving over to the 2000 to 2010 aquarium, the MRSA Layer is showing signs of new growth, which is great. All the other plants showing good growth. No nuisance algae on show, and again we'll prune that Limnophila Flora right back to give the plants more light availability. Finally, this is the problem tank, the only problem tank we really have in the decade tanks, the 2010 to 2020. The Micranthemum Monte Carlo has melted back quite significantly. You can see the leaves, a lot of them have gone almost transparent. The Bucophalandra as well here, this is looking quite poorly, lots of melting going on there. And also the Hygrophila araguaia has all melted back, so this will need replanting. What we can do is siphon away the melted leaves and hopefully leave a healthy rhizome if it is healthy, and this will produce new healthy leaves, hopefully. Plants melt for various reasons. It could be too much of a shock for the plant in the new system. Could be a big temperature fluctuation or pH drop. We did inject quite a lot of CO2 in these in the early days and we had a few issues with controlling that CO2. So the pH swing may have caused the plants to suffer. Okay, moving over to the limited edition aquarium, escaped by the guys from Liquid Nature. You can probably see the dominant feature is the helping plants, the Limnophila Flora. But overall, all of the other plants are doing okay. We do have again some melting Bucophalandra and some minor case of melting on some of the Monte Carlo again. So I've just had a chat with the guys here at Tropica and we were a little bit concerned about this melting, and actually once we've really thought about it and looked at the tanks where the melting has occurred, there is a common denominator. The majority of the plants that have melted have been glued onto the hardscape. So this by no means indicates that it's 100% fact that when you use glue, the plants melt, because we have glued other plants on and they've been fine, and there have been some other plants that are melted that haven't been glued, but it's just a strong correlation. There's other considerations as well. You know, we did do large water changes with cold water, so this temperature fluctuation may have triggered melting. We did perhaps inject a little bit too much CO2 at the start, so this pH difference may have caused the melting, and there's always a risk of melting with a plant that's been grown out of water, and it may struggle to adapt to its underwater conditions. I would hazard a guess that it's a combination of all these things that have triggered this melting. So just wanted to explain a little bit more in detail the potential causes behind this melting. I'm not saying never glue your plants because they're going to melt. I still glue my plants at home. We have glued some plants here and they've been absolutely fine. Nothing to worry about, just something that I thought would be worth telling you. So the algae eaters are in here, the nearite snails and the amano shrimp. Sounds like a lot of algae eaters. It is a lot of algae eaters, but we want to have a pristine aquascape ready for Interzoo in May. Excited to see this one grow in and maintain it. We are doing 80% water changes every other day at the moment on these tanks. As they mature, we can drop that down a little bit, but it's really important to do these large frequent water changes in the early days to help prevent algae. That in addition to the algae eaters, not using full lighting just yet, starter plants, all these things added together hopefully mean that we don't have too much nuisance algae. Okay, here we are with the easy, medium, advanced and the Kiba cube tanks. Nothing really to report here. All of the plants growing healthily, no signs of any melting. Added the algae eaters as before. Got the beginner starter plants in there as well, apart from in the easy tank. We haven't used them in there because there's so many fast growing easy plants in there already. But all of the other scapes here do have the Limnophila Flora. The GlossoStigma in the advanced tank has gone a little bit leggy again, so we'll trim that. Hopefully that's going to promote some tighter carpeting, more compact carpeting. We're not actually using the reflectors on any of the lights, the T5 fluorescent lamps here yet. As the plants mature and the whole system matures and there's less likely going to be any algae issues, we can add the reflectors, which is going to boost that overall lighting level, promote kind of more compact, more colourful growth, and get those scapes looking as good as we can, ready for Interzoo in May. Okay, let's look at the Limnophila Flora in more detail. You can see in here we've probably got 6 or 7 pots altogether, and it's starting to kind of take over the scape. They're really tall, they're starting to block the plants underneath. It's also starting to affect the overall circulation in the aquarium, so we need to trim these back. Now, a few ways you can do it. You can be really brutal, so you can take the pot out in one go, hold it so there's a few inches, and just tear all those stems off and then put it back. Or we can trim the individual stems. Another technique is to actually trim back only a third of the total mass in that pot and leave the other 2/3 there. So at any one time, you always have like a healthy, tall part of the stem plant bunch. So we can use our fingertips to trim as well. We don't actually need to use scissors all the time, although using sharp scissors tends to reduce the risk of bruising, which can actually damage the plant. But Limnophila Flora is such an easy, hardy plant. We can just be quite brutal with it and we know it's going to grow back no problem. So we've taken about a third of those stems away, and now wherever we've trimmed from, you're going to get 2 new shoots. So this is going to really encourage bushy growth, more biomass in the long term, and you can end up with literally a huge explosion of stem plant growth, especially with such a fast grower. So it's something we need to keep in check. I anticipate we'll probably only use these for another 2 or 3 weeks, and then we'll probably get rid of all of them from all of the scapes. But just a really great way to help out with algae in new setups. We've also got floating plants in most of the scapes as well. This is Limnobium laevigatum, or Amazon frogbit. And floating plants are great because they shade the aquascape, which helps to reduce algae. They grow very fast because they have unlimited access to CO2 in the air, and they're nearer the light source, physically nearer the light. They produce lots of oxygen. If you have fish in your aquarium as well, they help to produce a sense of security for the fish. So floating plants are a really, really good idea. They're also a great indicator plant because they grow so quickly. They show any nutrient deficiencies before the slower growing plants. So this is a good example here. You can see the newer growth, the new leaves are actually a lot paler green than the older leaves. So this is, to me, is indicating that actually there's quite low nutrients in this aquarium. But that's not a bad thing. We don't want to overload with nutrients because we may end up with algae issues. So just another way to use floating plants, not only to help prevent algae, but also as a nutrient indicator. So we'll just trim all the other plants back quite brutally. So let's take this one out here. We've actually used some metal weights there, just clamped to the pot so they remain submerged so the pot doesn't go floating about. And I'm just quite keen to make sure these tall stem plants aren't overshadowing the carpeting plants. And you can actually replant these if you wanted to. If you've got another aquarium or you've got a friend that wants to grow some plants, you might be on a really strict budget, then by all means give your stems away. Whatever you do, when you get rid of any plant cuttings, don't throw them out into the wild. If they get into a natural waterway, they can end up spreading and becoming invasive. And this is a really, really bad thing. So make sure you always dispose of your excess aquarium plants appropriately. Okay, so there you go, a quick guide on how we can use helping plants in the aquarium, both the fast-growing stem plant. You can use any species you like. Limnophilis Flora just happens to be one of the fastest and easiest to use. And that in combination with the floating plants, really good way to help give you hopefully an algae-free startup in your aquarium. So we talked about the different ways that we can hopefully help prevent algae by using lots of helping plants, limiting lighting, and also large frequent water changes. Another great way is to use an algae crew. In our case, we're using Amano shrimp and also nearite snails. These are great because they don't actually produce much waste. We could use algae eating fish, but relatively speaking, in terms of how much algae they help to clear up compared to how much waste they produce, they're actually quite inefficient. So we're actually stocking a ratio of 1 Amano shrimp per 5 litres of aquarium water and 1 nearite snail per 2 litres of aquarium water. So a huge army of shrimp and snails. These are more a preventative measure rather than a corrective measure. So it's always better to help prevent algae rather than treat it. Once you've got algae in the first place, it's normally quite tricky to get rid of it. Much easier to prevent it from happening. We do have some very minor algae issues already, but I actually, at the time of filming, added the shrimp yesterday and they've already dealt with it. So just a really good way to show you guys how to deal with minor algae issues right at the start. Okay, there you go, a general update of the 10 aquascapes here at Tropica, all set up to help celebrate Tropica's 50th birthday at Interzoo 2020. And also a quick guide on helping plants, how to trim them, and also algae eaters. You can look forward to more updates in a couple of weeks' time. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out. Hit that notification bell as well. Hit the like button if you have enjoyed this, and leave us a comment. What kind of content would you like to see in future updates? Maybe a focus on one particular aquascape, or some planting tips, or something on fertilizers, for instance. Let us know in the comments what you'd like to hear. Okay, really look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye-bye.